first, let's see, certain risk, terminologies before we go ahead. Okay. So first is an asset. Asset is something which you are trying to protect. Okay. Then comes the asset valuation. Okay. What is asset valuation? Asset valuation is the dollar value you associate to a asset so that you can do a quantitative analysis. As long as you can associate this dollar value, you will be able to carry out a quantitative analysis of a particular given asset. Just a second. Okay, right. So as long as you can give a dollar value to an asset, what can happen is you can carry out its, quantitative risk assessment. Now, asset valuation doesn't mean the purchase cost. Purchase cost is just one of the cost, right? Value means what? Amazon may build an Amazon app for say $2 million, but it carries out a business of 10 billion. So what is the value of the asset? The value of the asset is 10 billion plus 2 million, right? So if the AWS app gets denial of service attack for 2 hours, and say every hour it generates $10 million, and if the website is under denial of service attack for 2 hours, what will be the loss in revenue? Okay, that will be close to $20 million, right? Now, if the loss is going to be $20 million, and a denial of service attack for on AWS application can bring it down for 2 hours, doesn't it mean that you need to put some control which can save this $20 million, right? So you put a control, the cost of this control, whatever you put to deny this denial of service, okay, whatever control you put to take this denial of service attack back, okay, or safeguard the AWS asset, right? That would be the control cost, right? So you put a control now, and the cost of the control is say $2 million. Okay. So what happens is by employing a $2 million control, you have saved $20 million. So cost to the company now for this control is actually the savings is cost benefit analysis. If you do is roughly $18 million, right? So you have actually put a $2 million, okay, control and saved $18 million, right? That's the impact. So you know that a denial of service impact would have been $20 million. Now putting a control worth $2 million saved you, that $20 million, right? But the cost to company is now $2 million and overall savings is $18 million. So your profit has gone down by say 10%, but it's better than losing $20 million, right? Then once you have an asset, you have an asset valuation, and then you have threats. We told you what are threats. Threats are any undesirable or unwanted event which can cause outage or cause the loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability of an asset, right? If the threat wants to cause a harm to the CIA, okay, then it can materialize into a risk, okay? Then, but threat in standalone is nothing. Somebody needs to, activate this threat. Somebody who chooses to activate this threat is called a threat agent or a threat actor, right? So you might have a denial of service attack. You can carry out a denial of service attack, but it cannot happen on its own. Somebody has to launch a denial of service attack. So the threat agent, which launches the denial of service attack, becomes the threat agent, and denial of service becomes the threat. Okay. Then you have threat events. Threat events are whenever a threat materializes, it is called a threat event. Okay. Whichever direction the threat agent, okay, decides to take the threat. Say, I know that I can carry out denial of service attacks in multiple ways. I can carry out a SYN flood attack. Okay. I can carry out an ICMP attack. I can go and cut the cable. That also is a denial of service attack, right? I go and cut the cable of the Amazon server, which connects to the backend. I go and cut this cable. Some internal threat goes and cuts this cable, right? So that will, so these are vectors. So you can carry out a SYNFLOOD denial of service attack. You can carry out a ICMP attack. You can also go and cut the cable. So there are different kind of vectors to carry out one type of a attack, that is denial of service attack, right? Then you have vulnerabilities. What is vulnerability? Vulnerability is the weakness in the system. Okay. And when the threat chooses to exploit the vulnerability, what happens? Exposure happens. Okay. So these should be very, very clear. Now, whenever the exposure happens, what are the chances of that exposure?
Your voice is lost. Sorry.
Oh, I'm not mute. Check.
No, no. Yes, now it's okay.
Everybody else is able to hear me?
Yes, no issues.
No issues. Okay. Right. So once a threat actor, chooses to exploit a weakness, that leads to an exposure. Now, what will be the exposure? What will be the limit of the exposure is given by a factor called EF, exposure factor. Right? Okay. Any doubts still now? Okay. If none, then let's move ahead. And now finally comes risk. Now, risk, once you try to analyze whether quantitatively or qualitatively, can be given as threat into vulnerability. Now, you cannot assign quantitative values to threat and vulnerability. So the only way you can assign some kind of a value is the likelihood. That means what is the chances that this threat will materialize? Likelihood of the threat. And vulnerability is what is the impact. So if threat chooses this vulnerability, then what will be the impact? Right? This can be given in a quantitative manner. Clear? We will do a numerical, small, very funny, simple numerical. It's there in the Cybex. And then, okay. So now once you've calculated risk, now you know that you have this, you have an asset and you have multiple risks. Or just let's say a risk is there, 90%. You want to reduce this risk to 10%. Now, why you want to reduce it? Because this is your risk appetite. This is the tolerance level of your risk. You say, okay, I can take on 10% loss to my business. Okay. But I cannot accept a 90% loss. So how do you bring the risk of 90% to 10%? You implement safeguards. Right? Now, the cost of the safeguard cannot be higher than the asset itself. If the cost of the safeguard is higher than the asset, that means you're putting a $10 lock on a $1 asset. Okay. So you can never have a safeguard which is costing you higher than the asset itself. Remember that. At times, organizations have implemented controls which are higher in cost than the asset itself, leading to revenue loss. Okay. Now, such things are done in government organizations because government organizations are very difficult to value something. Why? Because they're not revenue generating organizations. Okay. They're administrative organizations, right? So safeguards or controls reduce the chances of or bring down your risk levels. Okay. So that is how you calculate the risk. Now, first of all, we will see the qualitative techniques. And then once we have done qualitative techniques, then we will see the quantitative techniques. Okay. Now, as we saw that yesterday, if we can carry out, so to find out risk, therefore, to find out risk, The first task is to find out threats. And the second task is to find out vulnerabilities. Okay. And then determine what will be the impact and what is the likelihood. Right? If you want to do a quantitative or even a qualitative analysis. So that's why you need to do a threat analysis first. And how do you do threat analysis? By threat modeling, which we saw yesterday. There are multiple ways in which you can do threat modeling. Right? We have certain frameworks for threat modeling. We have Stride, we have PASTA, we have VAST, by which we can do threat modeling. And how do we do vulnerability assessment? We do vulnerability assessment through what is called vulnerability VA. Okay, so you have tools for vulnerability assessment. In case of if the vulnerabilities lie in the IT domain, you have multiple tools. What are the tools commonly used? Qualys, Nessus, OpenVAS. Okay, these are the tools generally used to find vulnerability inside your, these are the tools which we commonly use for finding vulnerabilities in your system and network. Right now, once you have found out, you've done the threat modeling, and then you have found out the vulnerability, you will be able to carry out a risk assessment. Okay. Now, once you have found out threats and vulnerabilities, you can carry out a risk assessment. Now, you can carry out a risk assessment qualitatively or quantitatively, as I told you. Now, one of the most simplest way you do a qualitative risk analysis is by creating a risk matrix. Right? You say that what is the risk? Risk is of denial of service attack. So you carry out a matrix. You have a standard matrix. You have, you have a 3x3 or a 5x5 matrix, whatever you want to create. It's up to you. Okay, nobody defines you. And you say, what are the chances? You say chances is high, medium, low. Okay, this is impact, and this is likelihood. Okay, so now you say the impact of a denial of service attack is high. Okay, and likelihood is medium. So where does this particular risk lie? It lies in the high medium, matrix. And therefore, once you create your risk matrix, you say risk, and you say denial of service, and you say it is what is likelihood into impact, your risk. What is the type of risk? Okay, and what is the risk parameter? You say high medium. Okay, and then you can give this high medium a number. You can always now you can give in the matrix what is a number, right? And that's how you generally carry out, most of the organizations carry out this matrix kind of a risk assessment. Okay, there are many other qualitative techniques. Okay, one of them is brainstorming. What is brainstorming? We all sit down in a room and discuss that, okay, what is this threat? How are we going to, take it? So such kind of assessments are called qualitative assessments, because you are not exactly, giving some number. You are discussing and you try to find a meaning to the risk. Okay. And then you create a report. You definitely, you document it. Right. Quantitative analysis will, in any case, will get documented, but qualitative analysis, whenever you're doing brainstorming or some kind of storyboarding, you're creating focus groups. Okay, you're carrying out surveys, you're carrying out questionnaires, checklist, one-on-one meeting with managers, you're taking interviews, scenarios, you need to document it. Okay, one of the common techniques used in qualitative risk assessment is called Delphi technique. Okay. Now, Delphi technique is a technique wherein it is the anonymous feedback. Okay. Basically, if you want to know, say you want to know of the risk of, identity spoofing in your organization, right? That how many employees forget their identity cards and then they do a tailgating. You want to know that, okay? You are not able to get a figure. So now you you take a subset, you take 100 employees and give them an anonymous, questionnaire. That do you think that employees violate the tailgating policy of the organization. Now, the moment it is anonymous, people would like to be truthful and they will give you a realistic feedback. Delphi techniques are used to take realistic, anonymous feedbacks. Right? Okay. You can also do scenario building. You can, give a scenario to a group of people and say that, let's assess what are the threats, what are the loss potential. Okay. This is how generally you carry out, qualitative risk assessments. Okay. Now,
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe our channel.